Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and as I've seen on a number of different channels lately, people are explaining on their videos how they're preparing for going away on vacation, and I'm going on vacation too in a few days. So yesterday I started into trying to sort of heavy feed a lot of my bins that are due now for a feeding, and I'm trying to take care of all the bins that need feeding before I end up going away. And the one that I took care of yesterday was the 6.5-week-old European nightcrawler bin that you see down there on the lower left on the corner. The one that's scheduled for today, because I did put a little schedule together for myself to make sure I take care of everything, is the African nightcrawler bin that you see up here. And just like yesterday, it had been 9 days since the bin was last fed. Same thing here, 9 days since the last feeding. This bin's a little bit older. This one is 93 days old, so a week away from being 100 days old. So far it's received 10 feedings, and like I've been doing lately, I'm going to take a look inside the bin, see how things look, and then, based on what appears to be the need in terms of, how much leftovers there are, how many worms are there, so on and so forth, I'll make sure to bring down an adequate amount of food so that the feeding in this bin can last for at least 2 weeks. I mean, it's really technically 11 days, but I just want to play it safe and make sure I'm setting up all my bins that I'm going to be leaving for the next, I don't know what period of time, to be, in a good shape to be able to just sustain themselves at least for 2 weeks on their own, not knowing exactly when I'll be back into these bins to feed them next. So I'm going to get that bin up onto the bench and we'll get to work. I think that the feeding that they're going to get today is going to start getting geared towards maybe optimizing the harvest of the contents of the bin. Usually I kind of treat 100 days old as sort of the point in time, or near there, for when I want to start reducing the types of materials that I know are not going to break down in a given period of a few weeks or so. Because, if there again, the 100-day threshold kind of goes hand in hand with sort of the assumption that maybe around day 150 the bin would get harvested, which, at 100, you've still got 7 weeks after that, if that's the game plan. And 7 weeks is usually enough time for most things to get broken down, but certain things won't, so maybe it would be at that time that you decide you're not going to put in a nice fresh stem. But this thing's been in here for many weeks, and my hope is that, in the next 7 or 8 weeks, that will in fact get broken down. But it's the sort of thing I might consider not putting into the bin at this point. Corn cobs, I think, are usually a good candidate to avoid from bins where you're going to want to harvest soon, if you don't think that's going to be a good scenario where the contents of the bin have not been all broken down and eaten yet. Because there again, corn cobs, surprisingly, are a slow composting item. Perhaps the shells of avocados, things like that. Things that are not going to break down entirely in the given amount of time. Perhaps lean more towards leafy things or softer things that are higher moisture content. I'm assuming you get the general idea. Along those same lines, I guess I was going to just use that as a segue into what you usually see on the top of my bins, which is a good amount of leafy stuff. But if you were to watch the video from the last time that this bin was fed, which was 9 days ago, you would notice that there were no fresh leaves added. Because I guess I was already starting to get into that thinking that says, hey, if you put in some fresh leaves today, yeah, I mean, maybe in a couple weeks the leaves themselves will have gotten broken down, but it's these stems. The stems take forever. So the stems, I believe, are the main reason I usually try to avoid adding leaves into my bins as bedding, at least in the older containers. All right, when I see little white specks, I usually have to kind of assume that they are probably mites. And I guess maybe this is just kind of a throwback to what my thinking used to be, which is, oh my goodness, mites, what do I do about them? More recently, it's just kind of been more of an acceptance of the fact that they're probably, present in all bins, and it's just really their numbers that should alarm you if there's too many of them. A large number of mites often means possibly too much moisture, a glut of too much food. Who knows? Maybe there's a lot of worms dying and they're going nuts. They're exploding in numbers because they've got a large amount of dead worm to eat. So more recently, I've just been trying to use the presence of many mites as more of a telltale rather than something to react to. Now in my case, I guess the possibility of the bin being a little bit too damp is a little bit unlikely. I've been doing a lot lately to focus on maintaining moisture levels better lately without letting things get too damp. So, you know, in this case, it does seem realistic to believe that perhaps excess food being around and available could be one of the reasons. And this avocado could be to blame. Looks like the avocado has not yet been breached, or maybe it has, but there's definitely a whole bunch of worms hanging out right beneath it in the material right below. That's why I've been wanting to lately take good amounts of bedding always and put it right beneath the different foods that I give them, especially when I can suspect that the foods are going to be emitting moisture. Most of the stuff I give them does because it was frozen. Look at all these little worms sticking to my glove. So we'll give them a lot of carbon, a good amount of bedding, along with whatever we give them today. But I guess we'll be steering away from leaves. We're going to be giving them mainly paper, shredded paper. I've got a whole bunch of it on hand that I sort of processed not too long ago. And I think the junk mail bin actually has a new flyer that's the type of paper I've been using and shredding. So that was a pretty good turnout right below where that avocado was. I'm trying to remember what else was included in last week's feeding. Every time I kind of unearth the feeding area of a bin that's supposed to be night crawlers and I see a lot of worms hanging out, it makes me question whether they're actually night crawlers or maybe there's some other kind of worm. These worms do seem to like mobbing together, which usually I don't see that behavior in my night crawler bins, at least in my European night crawlers. But these worms are pretty content to be hanging out in little mob scenes. You saw a piece of corn cob that I found amongst this material, all these worms. I'll tell you, little chunks of newspaper here and there, little sort of pieces sticking together, mainly because they were jumbled together and were not easy access from all directions because of that. Those are the ones that are still sort of sticking together and remaining whole. But, geez, I don't remember how much bedding was put in here last time, but it does seem like they did a good job on breaking a good amount of it down. So let's grab all these collected items so we could take a peek under this edge too. Little bits of the bedding that was jammed in underneath the feeding, and there would have been a good amount of it. And the only stuff that you're really seeing are these pieces of newspaper, possibly a couple layers thick in these little wads. So they'll take a little longer naturally. More corn cob. So this feeding, I think, is to me an indicator that there's going to be a pretty good need for a good generous portion, because I do see a lot of worms, and I do see a lot of progress on the material that they've been fed previously 9 days ago. Because all the stuff that is going to be always leftovers for the first couple weeks without being completely chewed away still remains, but I don't really see any other signs of anything else. Alright, so I'm going to take a little break at this time to go get some stuff from the freezer, and then we'll be able to feed these little guys. So I'll be right back with some food. Alright, so their fare today is going to be much of the same as they usually get, including coffee. Within its coffee filter, I even got my little holding box here with coffee, and the coffee that's been sitting around for who knows how long, probably months at this point. Because my consumption of coffee, or at least my ability to do away with the coffee, using the worms has really been diminished since I had that big die-off of worms recently. So I'm kind of glad when feel like I've got an opportunity to try to do away with some of that stuff. It's just been sitting around forever. So this was just a paper towel was sitting around, and you know, I talked about not wanting to use leaves as bedding, but luckily I've got a whole bunch of shredded newspaper that I could use. And I'm going to go really generous with this stuff. I even hacked up some cardboard the other day, so I think I've got a few chunks of cardboard we can even throw in here to kind of mix up the variety a bit. And you know, it's quite a bit, but I think after we put the food in, we might even put some more on top. Because if I want this bin to go for a couple weeks, and if, you know, what they've been primarily eating lately is the bedding, they should certainly have sufficient amounts of it to keep them going for a while, especially if I'm going to be away. So I like the banana peels, because banana peels kind of like the kind of the same as the corn cob, is one of those things that takes a little while to usually break down. So I imagine those as being sort of the stuff that might still even be here a little longer, as opposed to those things that are mostly water, like this chunk of cucumber, whatever it is that's frozen to it. I can't even tell what that is. These are the sort of things that I would normally expect to see eaten up quite quickly because of the, you know, huge amounts of moisture content. It's kind of sugary stuff, apple. But for whatever reason, I've always found that apples seem to take a little while. Maybe they have some sort of a quality that resists the infiltration of bacteria and then ward off the start of decomposition somehow naturally. I don't know. There's the stem of, maybe the stem of a hot head of cauliflower, as well as the base of the leaves from a couple of the chunks of cauliflowers is eggplant, I believe. A radish. And other dribs and drabs of similar stuff. Pretty cool, nice feeding. And don't forget, we're going to beef it up with a whole bunch of coffee. We could put some of it in now, I guess. Maybe we'll save that dry stuff to go up on top. Here's some more bedding, more paper for them to enjoy. Let me drop in, before I usually start putting on stuff that appears like layers, I like to put in some of the grit that I usually use, this crushed eggshell. It's a pretty nice generous amount. And we've got more coffee. I wondered if I could even fit this entire container in here. We might be able to. Before I do that, maybe I'll even lay down a little bit more bedding, get more stuff for them to hang out in and to chew on while I'm away. Trying to be generous here. See how this stuff looks. Every time I want to feed coffee lately, I just go right into where I have the empty coffee filter pulled out from the night before. Stuff has had the evening to dry a little bit and shed a little bit of its moisture. In the past, when the stuff would pile up, I had them in these boxes. I've got another full one upstairs, which has also similarly been sitting for probably a couple months at this point. So I thought I'd start to try to get rid of that stuff as well. A little bit more grit. I've got a good amount of it since I processed a whole bunch of eggshells not too long ago. And I've even got like the backup supply kind of brewing already. A whole bunch of eggshells that I've been collecting. I guess I am curious, if I were to peek inside this, would I find worms? There's a couple worms on the outside of it. And it's getting soft, but I would assume that it's just in the process of decomposition, not knowing if there's actually worms in here. Oh, I just cracked it by accident. Oops, now I get a little peek inside. I don't know, I don't see much action. I thought there might be. But there certainly was a good amount of action right below it. In the bedding that was right below it last time, right? So maybe we'll get a similar sort of reaction to some of this bedding that we pile around that hot ticket item over there. What do we have here? Okay, we've got a whole bunch of leftovers here. So before I start dragging in the material from the sides of the bin to cover up with, I guess we should try to reposition a lot of these items that we sort of examined a little bit more closely earlier. Make sure they're all in the right spot, which is down in the feeding area. And now I think we can start covering up. You know, we didn't even look at the outskirts of this bin. Checking out the outer edges of the container furthest away from where the feedings have been occurring is something I like to do, mainly because the moisture is supplied almost exclusively by the foods that I give the worms. Sometimes I'll add a little bit of water, spray a little bit of water in if I'm sort of dealing with a certain specific situation. But it does seem to me like I'm pretty well off providing the bin with moisture just by letting that moisture enter the bin through the foods that I give them, and then doing my best to prevent that moisture from evaporating out of the bin. It's always worked pretty good for me over the past couple years since I've been doing it. You just can't get too caught up in that whole preservation of moisture thing though, because I was running plastic covers on a lot of my systems in order to help keep moisture in. And I certainly, value that as a good, very functional tool for limiting evaporation. And I'll definitely be using it at times, especially like in new bins or special use situations. I've just been treating it a little bit of as a taboo because I do sort of see that as a possible reason why I had issues recently. Maybe just hanging on to a little bit too much moisture could be kind of one of those too much of a good thing problems. And as much as the worms definitely seem to enjoy the moisture that always collected by being covered by plastic, a little worm party. Looks to me like they're just hanging out, enjoying, I don't know, bedding? I don't see any foods. So I think I'm in pretty good shape as far as moisture is concerned, but if I ever start to feel like things are getting a little bit too dry, and things out here on the edges do seem a little bit dry, but not dangerously dry, I've always got that option to start, covering up with plastic, forcing it to stay within the bin rather than escape out into the air. So, all right, I like the way this bin looks. We definitely gave it a good hearty feeding with lots and lots of carbon-based bedding. The carbon-based bedding is just the balance to their diet, because all that stuff that you saw that looks like food to you and me, those are all very nitrogen-rich parts of their diet. But they also rely just as heavily on the carbon-based side of their diet, which is all the dry stuff you give them usually as bedding, which ultimately turns to worm food as well. All right, good job. I think we're good for a couple weeks with this one, or at least I hope so, with all that bedding. So we'll check back in here after I get back from vacation. It's one more down, and over the next couple days I think I should be able to get everything taken care of so that it's safe for me to go on vacation and not worry about my worms. All right, everyone, that's it for the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please remember to leave me a thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. If you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching.